Hello and welcome to the Breath Army introductory video series designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to live to your true potential. My name is Jeff. I'm the founder of Breath Army, and these videos have been designed to answer some of the questions that I've heard repeated over and over and over again throughout the many different trainings and courses, workshops, and retreats that I've offered over the years through Breath Army. And in this video, we are going to speak to the topic of functional breathing. And I'll speak a little bit about my own personal experience with functional breathing, what functional breathing actually is, and a few of the points to consider when addressing our breathing and how to bring it back towards that functional range. And my own experience with breathing is one that I've been on this path for many, many years in my life. And it really started at a really low point in my life where I was really struggling with addiction and mental health issues. And at that point in my life, my breathing was really dysregulated. And I had had some really severe accidents, gone through some pretty severe traumas over the course of my life. And that had all left an imprint and impacted my breathing. And it wasn't until I started on the path of yoga that I started to realize that my breathing was really dysfunctional. And I started on the path of yoga when I was living in Mexico, and I didn't really speak Spanish at the time. And what I started to realize after a while of going to classes but not really understanding what they were talking about is that there was a lot of emphasis around this belly breathing is what it appeared to me to be, and I noticed that my breathing was pretty much the exact opposite of what they were demonstrating in these classes. And so that led me down this path to really try and understand more deeply my breath. And of course, the practice of yoga really helped me with that. And for many years I went down that path, learned all these different practices of pranayama, and eventually really got interested in different breathing exercises like the Wim Hof method, conscious connected breathing. And I was so fascinated by those experiences that I had through those different breathing techniques that I wanted to learn everything I could about them. And so I traveled around the world and I studied with many different masters and teachers of breathwork. And what I found after years of learning these different breathing techniques and traveling around the world and learning these different exercises was that I still didn't know very much around breathing. What was actual functional breathing and how was I supposed to breathe in my day-to-day life? Because I would have these big breathing experiences or I would have these meditative experiences, and then it seemed to me that moments after these really profound experiences of bliss and peace and joy, I could go right back to feeling terrible. And so I knew that there had to be a missing link to bring all of these different practices that I'd been learning for so many years into my day-to-day life and my moment-to-moment unfolding of reality. And to me, that's where functional breathing really shines, is in its ability to bring us into presence and to really shift and change our behaviors in our life to ones that are really supportive of the goals that we're trying to achieve in our lives. So when I realized that I'd learned all these different breathing techniques, but I still didn't know how to breathe, then that sent me down another rabbit hole of learning about functional breathing. And functional breathing, we could define it as breathing that is supportive of good health in the body, that is efficient, adaptive, appropriate, responsive to the different situations that we find ourselves in. And this is a mnemonic that Dr. Rosalba Courtney came up with many years ago. And if we look at that mnemonic, we could define it as the EARS mnemonic for breathing. EAARS. Efficient, adaptive, appropriate, responsive, and supportive of good health. And so how do we support good health in our body? Through breathing. What does that actually look like? What does it actually feel like? Well, we want our breathing to be according to the metabolic demands of our body. But because breathing is a behavior, and because that behavior is influenced by the different experiences that we find ourselves in over the course of our lives, and that breathing is a behavior that can adapt to help us cope with different overwhelming experiences, just like other behaviors that we use to cope with overwhelming emotions or sensations in our body, those compensatory behaviors and mechanisms aren't always supportive of good health, and breathing is certainly one of those. Those behaviors can actually be maladaptive. They can actually harm us over the long term. And while these different behaviors can help us to deal with really overwhelming experiences in the short term, the issue arises when those behaviors don't go back to baseline after the experience. And that's something that was observed through trauma and has been observed for thousands of years. Back in ancient Greece, they started to notice that soldiers that were coming back from combat had these dysfunctional behaviors that they retained even after being removed from these really stressful experiences. And so many of us that have had maybe accidents in our life or been in traumatic experiences, really stressful experiences, will find that we've adopted these different behaviors, and that when we find ourselves in other stressful experiences, that we just default to these different coping mechanisms that may actually not support our highest good and good health in our lives. And so that's one of the key pieces to understanding how the breath is such a powerful tool in helping us to work through dysfunctional patterns of behavior that we find ourselves in our lives. These patterns that repeat themselves over and over and over again, that we just want to let go in our life, but we don't really know how. To me, breathing is our greatest resource. And functional breathing is this tool that we have access to in every single moment of our life. It's always with us from the moment we're born till the moment we die. And if we learn how to utilize that tool, and I often speak to the breath as an anchor. It's something that we can hold on to. When things are getting kind of wavy or kind of crazy in our life, we can come back to our breath. And when we understand that when we change the way we breathe, we change the way that we feel, we can start to guide our breath and befriend our breath and allow that to take us towards more desirable states. And so if we often feel anxiety, if we often feel overwhelmed in our lives, so many different aspects of mood and energy and different behaviors that we might find ourselves in are often a direct reflection of the way that we're breathing. And so when we understand that, then we can kind of reverse engineer that so that we can utilize the breath as a tool to create these more desirable states. And so when we find ourselves feeling really overwhelmed, and we start to understand what functional breathing looks like, then we can start to guide ourselves towards that and start to bring that in and start to utilize the breath as a resource to really feel what's going on in the body, to feel that overwhelm and to consciously choose to move through it and to feel our way through it. We're not trying to avoid it, we're not trying to override it with the breath, but we're utilizing the breath as a resource to help guide us through that and guide us towards a state of regulation. So what does functional breathing look like? Well, there's another mnemonic in the breathwork world, which is LSD, which stands for light, slow, and deep breathing. But I like to flip that on its head and focus on the D, the deep, slow, and light breathing, and address that first aspect of the mechanics of our breathing, because that has the greatest impact and builds a solid foundation for addressing the other aspects of functional breathing. So deep breathing, what does that mean? Well, deep means far from the surface. So far from the point of entry of our breath, comes all the way down here. We find our respiratory diaphragm, and it actually starts below that at the pelvic floor. We want to initiate the breath at the pelvic floor and allow the breath to flow up. We want to engage actively this respiratory diaphragm and deepen our relationship with the respiratory diaphragm. When we've developed that relationship, we'll feel those lower ribs move out towards the sides. So as I take a breath in, we want to feel those ribs draw out laterally. And that's going to be an indication that our diaphragm is active and engaged, and that's going to allow our rib cage to open up and out and allow the air to flow in. So we want our breath to be deep. Dysfunctional breathing, our breath is shallow. It's up here in the chest. So it might take some practice to bring the breath down low. And the first stage of that practice is, of course, awareness. And so being aware when we find ourselves in different undesirable states, bring yourself into a place of awareness. Notice where in your body you're breathing. Are you breathing deeply? Are you breathing shallow? Are you breathing through your nose, or are you breathing through your mouth? Functional breathing, for the most part, is in and out through the nose with a soft, gentle breath. Of course, if we are training really hard, or maybe we are faced with some type of an emergency, then we have a backup system, and we have a system that can really move a lot of air quickly. But we don't want that to be our default baseline system of breathing. We want to breathe softly and gently in and out through the nose, and we want that breath to be deep. We want our breath to be slow, right? We want it to be efficient. We want it to be adaptive. And when we're not really engaged in a lot of activity, when the metabolic demands of the body are really low, perhaps you're sitting on a couch and listening to this video right now. In that case, we would want our breath to be really slow, really soft, and actually silent, because the metabolic demands of our body, breath is producing energy in the body. And so if we don't need to produce energy because we're not engaged in activity, then that means our breath can be really slow, really soft. As we increase the activity in our body, that's going to mean that our breath needs to speed up and that the volume needs to increase in order to create more energy. But we want that to happen in an efficient, adaptive, responsive way that's supporting the health and the energy demands of the body. So when it comes to breathing, volume is really important. And in many ways in our society, we often think that more is better. But when it comes to breathing, actually the inverse, the opposite is true. Less is more when it comes to breathing. And so we want to be conscious and aware of how much we're breathing. And if we're not really engaged in a lot of activity, then again, we want our breath to be soft. We want our breath to be light. So light as in decreasing the volume of the breath. But we still want that breath to be deep. We want that breath to be nice and slow. And so it can take some practice. And of course, that's why we dive deeper into all of these things in the different courses and retreats that I offer in the world, is to help people really embody this, because this, to me, is one of the most important skills that we can learn. It's a superpower to be able to understand your breath and to be able to deepen that understanding and harness that power of your breath to support you in achieving your goals in your life, to support you in good health in your body and mind. So it's one of the most important and fundamental tools that we can practice and bring into our lives to really help us succeed and reach that true potential that many of us are looking to reach in our lives. So a few things to think about there. Nose breathing is a huge one. deep breathing, slow breathing, light, soft breathing. And thinking as we go through our day-to-day life, is our breathing efficient? Is it adaptive? Is it appropriate, responsive, supportive of good health, supportive of the energy demands of our body? And at the end of the day, you're going to know if your breathing is functional, if it's supporting the way that you want to feel. And if you want to change the way you feel, change the way you breathe. Use your breath as that ultimate resource, that anchor that you always have access to, and you'll harness one of the greatest superpowers that you have access to in your life. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you've had experience with functional breathing, if you have questions about functional breathing, I'd love to hear them. Please share those in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them. And I just wish you the best on this journey of deepening your connection to your breath. I know it's been so profound and impactful for me, and I hope to see you in another video soon. Have a beautiful day.